There is someone in your life right now who feels everything you feel. Your pain, your joy, your loneliness, your fear. And they are using every single one of those feelings against you. For decades, psychology has warned you about one type of dangerous person. The narcissist. Cold, self-absorbed, incapable of empathy. Easy to identify once you know what to look for. But there is another type. Rarer, more sophisticated, far more dangerous. Carl Jung spent his life mapping the shadow of the human psyche, the buried, unacknowledged parts of the self that operate beneath conscious awareness. He identified that the most psychologically complex individuals were not the coldest, they were the ones who felt the most, and had learned to weaponize that feeling. Nietzsche called them the masters of masks, those who had developed emotional intelligence not as a tool for connection, but as a tool for dominance. Psychology now has a name for them. The dark empath. They are not narcissists. They are not psychopaths. They are something in between, and that position in between is precisely what makes them the most dangerous personality type you will ever encounter. In this video, I reveal 7 dark traits that define a dark empath. 7 ways they operate that are so precise, so targeted, so perfectly designed to feel like love and care, that most people never recognize what is happening until long after the damage is done. If you recognize these traits in someone close to you, your world will shift tonight. If you recognize these traits in yourself, that is an even more important conversation. Stay until the end. The final trait is the one nobody warns you about. Trait 1, they feel your pain. And they file it. Asterisk Jungian grounding, shadow and empathic attunement, Collected Works Volume 9 star. The defining difference between a dark empath and a narcissist is this. The narcissist cannot feel what you feel. The dark empath can, with extraordinary precision, and chooses what to do with that information strategically. Jung identified a phenomenon he called shadow integration gone wrong, when a person develops emotional attunement not toward genuine connection, but toward psychological leverage. They have done enough inner work to understand the human heart deeply. But they have chosen to use that understanding as a map rather than a mirror. Here is what this looks like in practice. You share something painful with a dark empath. A fear. An insecurity. A wound you carry from your past. They listen with exceptional attentiveness. They respond with exactly the right words. They make you feel, perhaps for the first time in your life, truly seen. What you do not realize is that they are simultaneously doing something else. They are filing. Every vulnerability you share becomes a data point. The rejection that still affects you. The parent who never said enough. The relationship that broke something in you. The specific words that, when said a certain way, make you doubt yourself completely. They do not use this information immediately. A dark empath is never rushed. They store it, sometimes for months, waiting for the moment when the strategic deployment of your own wound serves their purposes. Real-world example, think about a relationship, romantic, professional, or personal, where someone seemed to understand you with uncanny depth very early. Where the intimacy felt accelerated. Where they seemed to know exactly what to say at exactly the right moment. Now think about whether there was ever a later moment, during a conflict, during a period of their withdrawal, where the very things you had shared in vulnerability were used to undermine you. Subtly. With plausible deniability. That acceleration of intimacy was not chemistry. It was reconnaissance. Asterisk asterisk, they don't listen to understand you. They listen to own you. Asterisk asterisk. Trait 2. Their empathy turns on and off like a switch. Asterisk grounding, selective empathy, Cialdini plus Dark Triad Research, University of Bath 2021 star. A true empath cannot control their empathy. It is not a choice, it is a permeability. They feel the room whether they want to or not. It costs them something. A dark empath's empathy has an on-off switch. In moments where displaying empathy serves them, they are the most attuned, most compassionate, most present person you have ever encountered. In moments where empathy costs them something, it disappears. Completely. Instantly. Without transition. This is the tell. This is the signature that distinguishes genuine emotional attunement from its weaponized version. Nietzsche wrote in Beyond Good and Evil that the most dangerous form of power is the power that knows when to appear gentle. Gentleness on demand is not gentleness, it is strategy. The person who can turn warmth on and off at will has not developed emotional intelligence. They have developed emotional control, and those are not the same thing. Research published in 2021 by the University of Bath confirmed what psychology had long suspected: dark empaths score high on measures of both empathy and dark triad traits. They experience empathy cognitively, meaning they understand what you feel, without necessarily experiencing effective empathy, meaning they do not automatically share your emotional state. This allows them to deploy the appearance of empathy selectively, without the cost that genuine empathy carries. Real-world example. Think about whether you have ever been in a situation where someone was remarkably compassionate during the early stages of knowing them, and then, at a moment of conflict or when you needed them most, seemed to become a completely different person. Cold. Absent. Unmoved by the very distress they would have previously responded to immediately. And then, when the conflict resolved or when they needed something from you, the warmth returned as if it had never left. No explanation. No transition. Just back. That is not moodiness. That is not a bad day. That is a switch. Asterisk asterisk, when empathy is a tool, it only works when they're using it. When you need it most, they put it away. Asterisk asterisk. Trait 3, they make you feel guilty for their behavior. Asterisk grounding, covert manipulation, George K. Simon, in Sheep's Clothing star. This is where the dark empath separates completely from the narcissist, and becomes more dangerous. The narcissist makes you feel bad through overt behavior. Criticism. Dismissal. Contempt. It is uncomfortable, but it is visible. You can point to it. You can name it. The dark empath never gives you anything to point at. They make you feel guilty through a precision instrument, your own empathy turned back on you. Here is how it works. When confronted about behavior that hurt you, the dark empath does not defend or dismiss. They collapse. Suddenly, the conversation is no longer about what they did, it is about how the confrontation is affecting them. The pain in their voice. The vulnerability in their expression. The soft devastation of someone who genuinely cannot believe that you would see them this way. And your empathy, the real empathy that you actually possess, immediately responds. You soften. You explain that you didn't mean to hurt them. You apologize for bringing it up. You comfort the person who caused the original harm. The conversation ends. Nothing was resolved. But somehow, you feel like the one who did something wrong. George K. Simon, in his landmark work on covert aggression, identified this as one of the most sophisticated manipulation tactics available. precisely because it weaponizes the victim's own compassion. The more empathetic you are, the more effective this technique becomes against you. Real-world example: think about a conversation where you tried to address something that hurt you, and somehow, by the end of that conversation, you were the one comforting the other person. You walked in with a legitimate grievance and walked out wondering if you were being too sensitive. If this pattern has repeated, where your attempts to address problems always end with you apologizing, you are looking at the third trait of a dark empath. ***, they never take the blame. They redirect it. And they use your compassion as the weapon. ***. Trait 4, they know exactly how much to give you. **grounding, variable ratio reinforcement, B.F. Skinner plus behavioral psychology star. This is the trait that creates the most confusion. Because unlike the narcissist, who withholds consistently, the dark empath gives. Generously. Warmly. Specifically. But never enough to make you feel secure. Always enough to make you stay. Behavioral psychology has documented what Skinner called variable ratio reinforcement, the most powerful reward schedule in human behavioral conditioning. It is the same principle that makes gambling addictive. Not consistent reward, unpredictable reward. Because the brain, when it cannot predict when the reward will come, begins to orient toward it constantly. The dark empath, whether consciously or intuitively, operates on this exact schedule. There are periods of exceptional warmth, attention, affection, recognition that feels like sunlight. And then periods of inexplicable distance, nothing dramatic, nothing you can clearly object to, just less. And then warmth again. Then distance. Your nervous system begins to orient around the cycle. You start to track their mood. You start to modify your behavior to increase the probability of warmth and decrease the probability of distance. You become, gradually and imperceptibly, addicted to their approval. This is not love. This is conditioning. Nietzsche wrote that the person who controls the distribution of warmth controls the relationship entirely. The one who gives consistently is valued. The one who gives unpredictably is worshipped. Real-world example: think about whether there is or has been someone in your life whose approval you found yourself constantly working for. Someone whose good mood felt like a relief and whose withdrawal felt like a punishment, even when you couldn't identify what you had done wrong. Someone around whom you always felt slightly uncertain about where you stood. That uncertainty was not accidental. It was the mechanism. ***, they never give you enough to feel safe. They always give you enough to stay. That gap between those two amounts, that is where they live. ***. Trait 5, they weaponize intimacy. ***grounding, Machiavelli, The Prince, Chapter 18 plus Jung, Shadow Projection Star. Machiavelli wrote in Chapter 18 of The Prince that everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you actually are. The dark empath has understood this principle at an operational level. They create intimacy, real intimacy, the kind that requires genuine vulnerability on your part, and then they use that intimacy as leverage. Not obviously. Not crudely. With the precision of someone who knows exactly how much intimacy creates dependency and exactly how much withdrawal creates desperation. Here is the specific mechanism. The dark empath invites your vulnerability. They create conditions, through their own selective disclosure, their careful attunement, their apparent emotional safety, that make you want to be known by them. To be truly seen. This is a fundamental human need, and they understand it better than most. In sharing yourself with them, You create, without realizing it, a private architecture of your inner world. Your specific fears, your particular shame, the exact contours of your insecurity. They hold that architecture. And when the relationship shifts, when conflict emerges, when they need compliance, when you try to leave, they navigate that architecture with a familiarity that you gave them. The thing you shared in love becomes the thing they use in strategy. Jung described this as shadow exploitation, when one person uses their knowledge of another's shadow, their hidden vulnerabilities, their suppressed fears, not to help them integrate those parts, but to control them through those parts. Real-world example: have you ever been in a relationship where the things you shared in your most vulnerable moments were later used against you, not brutally, not obviously, but subtly? A reminder of an insecurity at a moment when you were trying to assert yourself. A reference to a fear at a moment when you were trying to leave. A use of your own private language, the language of your inner world, that felt like a violation because they had only learned it because you trusted them with it. That is trait 5. And it is, perhaps, the most intimate form of betrayal that exists. Asterisk asterisk, they don't weaponize your weakness. They weaponize your trust. Which is far worse. Asterisk asterisk. Trait 6, they leave no evidence. Asterisk grounding, covert aggression, George K. Simon plus Darvo Research Star. This is the trait that makes the dark empath so difficult to identify, and so difficult to explain to others. The narcissist leaves evidence. The cruelty is visible. The dismissal is documentable. Other people witness it. Patterns become clear over time. The dark empath leaves nothing. Every act of manipulation has plausible deniability. Every moment of coldness could be explained by stress or tiredness. Every use of your vulnerability could be reframed as honest communication. Every guilt induction could be reframed as their own genuine hurt. When you try to explain to others what is happening, you cannot articulate it in a way that sounds credible. Because what you are describing is not behavior that can be pointed at. It is a pattern of timing, of calibration, of specific emotional targeting that only you have experienced with sufficient frequency to recognize. And the dark empath knows this. They know that what they do is not provable. They know that your inability to explain it clearly will make you doubt your own perception. This is not accidental. The invisibility is part of the design. George K. Simon documented this extensively. Covert aggression is specifically structured to avoid detection. It is not a side effect of the manipulation. It is a feature. Real-world example. Think about whether you have ever tried to explain a dynamic to a friend or family member and watched their expression become slightly confused. Not dismissive, confused. Because what you were describing didn't sound like abuse, didn't sound like cruelty, didn't sound like anything they recognized as a problem. And in that moment, you may have started to wonder if the problem was your perception. That self-doubt, that questioning of your own experience in the face of another person's invisible behavior, is the intended outcome. Asterisk asterisk, they don't just manipulate you. They make you doubt your own account of being manipulated. That is the masterpiece. Asterisk asterisk. Trait 7, they are the hardest people to leave. Asterisk grounding, trauma bonding, Patrick Collins plus intermittent reinforcement research star. This is the final trait. And it is the one that completes the architecture. Every previous trait has built toward this one. The filing of your vulnerabilities, so they know exactly which levers to pull. The selective empathy, so you always believe the warm version is the real one. The guilt induction, so your attempts to leave become conversations about their pain. The variable reinforcement, so your nervous system is conditioned to need their approval. The weaponization of intimacy, so your best memories are tangled with your worst experiences. The invisible evidence, so you cannot explain to yourself or others why leaving feels necessary. All of it, every trait, creates one outcome. You stay. Not because things are good. Because the attachment that was built in the warm periods is real, even if the warmth that built it was not. Because leaving requires walking away from the best version of them, the version that felt like recognition, like safety, like finally being known. Because some part of you believes, despite all evidence, that if you can just find the right thing to say or be, the person who was there in the beginning will come back. They will not come back. They were never consistently there. But the nervous system that was conditioned around the hope of their return does not understand this. It just keeps waiting. Patrick Cons documented this as trauma bonding, the neurological attachment that forms not despite intermittent pain, but because of it. The cycle of warmth and withdrawal does not weaken attachment. It deepens it. This is not weakness. This is brain chemistry responding to conditioning. The dark empath does not need to keep you by force. They have built something inside you that keeps you, your own longing for the version of them that you believed was real. The reason you can't leave is not that you're weak. It's that they built something inside you designed specifically to make leaving feel like self-destruction. I want to stop here. Because there are two types of people watching this video right now. The first type is recognizing someone. A face is appearing in their mind as each trait is described. A relationship, current or past, that now has a name, a structure, an architecture they can finally see. If that is you, the recognition itself is the beginning of something important. Not because naming it removes the attachment. It won't. But because you cannot protect a boundary you cannot see. And now you can see it. The second type is experiencing something more uncomfortable. They are recognizing themselves. Not in the person being manipulated. In the dark empath. If you are in that second group, this is not the moment for self-condemnation. Jung's most important contribution to psychology was the insistence that the shadow, every suppressed, every weaponized, every unacknowledged part of the self, is not the enemy. It is the part of you that developed specific survival strategies in response to specific wounds. The dark empath does not emerge from nowhere. They emerge from a person who learned that vulnerability was dangerous, and that emotional intelligence, deployed strategically, was the only protection available. Understanding this is not an excuse. It is a starting point. The dark traits I have described are not fixed. They are patterns. And patterns, once seen, can be chosen differently. Conclusion, the final correction. The dark empath is not a monster. They are a person who developed extraordinary emotional intelligence, and chose, consciously or unconsciously, to deploy it as armor and weapon rather than bridge. They are the most sophisticated psychological challenge you will encounter, precisely because they feel, precisely because they understand, precisely because the connection they create is real enough to be genuinely painful when it is used against you. The protection against them is not coldness. Not suspicion. Not the closure of your own empathy. It is clarity. Clarity about the difference between being seen and being studied. Between vulnerability that is met with care and vulnerability that is met with filing. Between warmth that is consistent and warmth that is deployed. Nietzsche wrote that the person who knows their own depths cannot be reached by someone else who tries to use those depths against them. Jung wrote that the shadow of another person has no power over the person who has already faced their own. Machiavelli, in the coldest possible terms, would say this. Know the game before you agree to play it. You now know the game. The dark empath in your life just lost their most important advantage. Your blindness. If you made it to this point, you now understand something that most people spend years trying to name after the damage is already done. You understood it before. That is not a small thing. The most dangerous person you'll ever meet just became visible. And the next time you encounter someone who understands you with uncanny speed, who makes you feel chosen, who files your vulnerabilities with the precision of someone who intends to use them, you will know exactly what you are looking at. That knowledge is the only armor that actually works. You already know where to find us.